Research about people being asked where their emotion is located, like body mapping emotions. I find that very fascinating about where people feel fear versus compassion and love. What is your work or any comments on body mapping of emotions?
Yeah, I think that work is, excuse me, really fascinating. And it seems like there's both sort of consensus, but there's also really interesting variability in what people think about that. And so most of the research that's out there has focused on the consensus side of things, and they've said, look, people cross-culturally agree that, love is in the heart, and, fear involves the gut to some extent, and anger involves the hands, and so on. And so it's really interesting that there's this degree of cross-cultural consensus, or even within a population that, there's this degree of consensus. But the people who have looked at the variance, the differences that exist between people have also revealed all sorts of interesting things. So for some people, fear is much more in the gut than other people. For other people, fear is much more in the head. For some people, anger is really in the hands, and for other people, anger is really in the heart, and so on. And so these individual differences are really, really interesting to me. And what about, that person's environment and that person's experiences makes them associate the emotion in those different places? For instance, there's some evidence that one thing that my lab is interested in is, developmentally, how do emotions change and how do sort of the physical sensations of emotions change? And we're actually interested in the older end of the spectrum. So as people age, how are their bodies changing such that their physiological states change? And in turn, how is that changing sort of bottom up, how information is reaching their brain about their emotions in order for them to make meaning of it. And I have a colleague who's looked at this body mapping question and has found that actually for older adults, they say emotions are much more up here.
Really?
Which is really interesting. And so there's all of this rich sort of individual difference in people's concepts about where emotions should even come from in the body in the first place.
And I guess in that case, there is no right or wrong, because what you point out is that, number one, it's best to be your own scientist in the laboratory of your own body and map it out for yourself. But two, if we're looking at these emotions, not just for the sake of emotions, but to be able to better understand how to take constructive action in our own life.
Right.
That's what the end result is, no matter where it's located in the body. And these body sensations are just most helpful for us as individuals to understand and maybe to relate to others.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it may be that, in our culture, anger is defined by certain sensations. And so when we're trying to transmit that to children or people who are trying to acculturate and trying to understand our emotions, that might actually be really helpful information to share with them that sort of says, here's what the norm is. But you're right, there's no fact of the matter, actually, that anger comes from the heart or joy comes from the heart, because if you do things like measure people's cardiovascular experiences, there's no more cardiovascular change in anger than there is, say, in fear.
Well, you have given us a multi-dimensional view, a nuanced view of emotions that has really enriched my understanding of it. Thank you very much, Kristen.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been my pleasure.